Yo, what is up, guys? Will here from the Fantasy Flock with Canyon. And we've got our preseason fallers. We did a preseason risers for kind of the first initial NBA preseason games. Once again, like we mentioned for the risers, you don't want to overreact too much to preseason games and just looking at box scores and making that impact your fantasy decision for drafts. But it's something that we can work off of. That's a little bit more than just news reports in the offseason. We're actually seeing basketball games happen. So there are things to react to and kind of move the needle a little bit for players for us. First, initially, I hate talking about this, but injuries are just a part of NBA fantasy and obviously an impactful part. Players missing games, significant time, obviously impacts fantasy. So I want to call out a couple significant and you just kind of injuries to monitor. Especially if you're heading into your draft, just make sure you know kind of the status on these guys because a couple of these, happened in even games tonight and recently. First up, for the Magic, Jalen Suggs had the left knee sprain and bone bruise. It's not deemed to be super serious or long term, but it looks like it might be longer term. So they talked about a timeline. It's going to be determined on response to treatment. So we'll kind of see. That's one to monitor. But next up for the Wizards, Porzingis, who, is, we're pretty used to Porzingis and injuries, unfortunately, but he left the Hornets preseason game with an ankle injury. Haven't seen anything. Obviously, that was recently for us, recording this video right now, but that's one to monitor, especially with a guy like Porzingis, where, one of the downfalls of his ADP and where he's going in drafts is the injury concerns. So if we're already seeing it and, he's, maybe if it's a more serious ankle injury that's going to keep him out of games early on, definitely something to monitor. Next up, this one sucks, man. They all suck, but Hornets, LaMelo Ball, that left ankle sprain, it looks pretty bad. Obviously laid on the ground for a little bit after it. This is another one to monitor. I haven't seen any reports. This obviously was another one that was very recent. Just one to monitor. Obviously LaMelo being drafted super high, a guy we're really excited about. He's a huge breakout for us and for a lot of people. So hopefully it's not long term. Hopefully none of these are super long term. And then last up, for the Thunder, Shea, SGA, it's just a little scary. The MCL, there's been reports, I think Presti had said, hopefully he's ready for the start of the season. He said we'd love for him to be ready. Can't make predictions like that because nature's uncooperative is, interview and report we heard. And OKC's been pretty cautious. A lot of NBA teams are cautious with their players, but man, for an OKC team that just watched Chet Holmgren go down for the entire season, obviously they've shut down players in the past last season. I don't think that, I'm not saying they're going to tank and, Shea's not going to play at all this season. I'm not really worried about that. But I do think that they're not going to take any risks and they're going to wait until he's 100%. So Shea's just moved down a little bit for me just because, the cloud over if he's even going to be ready for the start of the season. But with all that aside, all the injury stuff aside, we're going to get into some fallers, preseason fallers for us that aren't injury related, just from what we see in the preseason. So Ken, you want to talk about our first one here, not injury related?
Yeah, first one here for the Hawks. We've got Clint Capella. First game in the preseason. He had some foul trouble, only played 19 minutes, and Okongwu came on and had 11.7 boards and a steal with a plus minus of plus 15. So he impacted the game a bit more. That first game was with DeJounte Murray, so the spacing was a little different in that game. And in game two, Capella had a better game, but that game was without DeJounte Murray. And so there's a big difference in spacing there, and it looked like Okongwu just kind of thrived better on the court with Trae Young and DeJounte Murray together. So, we were already a little bit worried about how long Capella's impact will last there on the team as the older big, with Okongwu getting more minutes later last season and how that's going to kind of carry into this next season. And so right away in the preseason, we saw Okongwu come in, impact the game really well in limited minutes as well. And so I'm already starting to see that baton get passed over to Okongwu from Capella. So I'm a little concerned about how he fits on this team with, Trae Young and DeJounte Murray. And if Okongwu is going to step up like this off the bench and play, really similar minutes to Capella, that moves down Capella a lot for me and probably bumps up Okongwu.
Yeah, and I do want to call out for a lot of these fallers, it's just more, uncertainty. So I don't think you're saying, Okongwu's, he's going to steal the starting job and he's going to be taking all of Capella's minutes, but just that there's a possibility that he eats into those minutes and is a stronger part of the rotation. That's something we've seen, in all NBA teams, young guys kind of stepping up and, minutes have to go somewhere. And, Okongwu's a guy we like a lot. And I think that's really possible. And so in a lot of these situations, if there's that uncertainty and it creeps in a little bit and, our initial thoughts are, kind of coming through in the preseason a little bit, it definitely moves guys down just with that uncertainty. So yeah, he's definitely a faller. Next up for me, it's a guy I had pretty high. Is kind of the main reason he's a faller. I'm not super worried, but Colin Sexton for the Jazz, he's a guy who shot up kind of my ADP draft board with with the trade, obviously going to the Jazz with Donovan Mitchell on the move. I anticipated obviously the Jazz were blowing it up. Rudy Gobert being moved, Donovan Mitchell with the other guards there. I think it's still possible that Clarkson and Conley move at some point in the season or possibly even soon. But he hasn't started either of the two preseason games. Now, I'm not like red flag going crazy right now because, it was his first action back. So it wasn't surprising for me in that first game. And obviously, it's not like they set the rotation right. A lot of these preseason, they're just throwing rotations together, even as starters. We saw Beasley was starting over him, and then Clarkson in the second game too. But I think the thing that's, making me feel kind of fine is Sexton's looked pretty good in the preseason. So I'm not like, he's not off my draft board or anything, but it is a little scary, for these guys who are popular sleepers, who are rising up draft boards and, going over guys who you're really confident in, what they're going to provide rotationally. Sexton's one of those guys who I like a lot. I think he's going to be really solid, but I mean, is there a possibility that, he's not this crazy usage guy that we were expecting? I think that exists. And so he moved down a little bit, mostly because I had him really high. Still like Sexton this year. And we'll probably see next preseason games, getting to see more action, more him playing well, but just moving him down a little bit for me.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because this is a team that's expected to be really bad. A lot of people are already talking about Wembanyama and who's going to tank for him and all this different stuff. But, the Jazz, from a fantasy perspective, you're like, dude, just play Sexton. He's the new guy you just paid for, and you got to play him a lot. He's a young, really athletic, talented guard. But, the Jazz staff might just be like, we want to play our veterans. Like you said, Beasley looks really good, and Clarkson. And so it's like could be a very frustrating scenario to keep an eye on for sure. Next up here, we got the Pelicans with Jonas Valanciunas. Zion's there. He's back. We haven't seen Valanciunas with Zion yet. And the rebounding numbers in the preseason already are down for Valanciunas with Zion in there. Not only is he going to rebound more, Zion's going to take a lot more of the offensive usage as well. Back in Memphis when Valanciunas was there with Jaren Jackson. When Jaren Jackson played with him, we saw, the rebounding numbers come down a lot for Valanciunas and vice versa when he was out. And so now you have a guy like Zion who not only is like, another high rebounding power forward, it's just a much more high usage power forward. So it could be a very scary hit for Valanciunas' numbers with Zion being back if he can remain healthy. And then obviously you got guys like BI in there too, but we've seen Valanciunas play well with them before. But Zion just demands a different kind of, offensive usage, great rebounder, and Valanciunas probably will take a good hit with his numbers there. So it's another thing to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and I think too, the thing with Val, like I don't necessarily think he's going to be phased out or anything or lose significant minutes, even from what we saw last season. But it happened in some of the playoff games where it was kind of weird, the minutes we were seeing from Val, and having Zion, that kind of unlocks new rotations you can use too. But even with all that being said, I think the biggest thing is just the upside. If Zion's there, where you're taking Valanciunas in drafts, what is the upside? Because I don't think it's going to be scoring if those guys remain healthy. CJ, BI, Zion. It's really hard for me to believe that, Val, puts up remotely close to the numbers he did last season if those guys are healthy. And obviously that's a question mark with Zion, right? Can't talk about Zion without talking about health. So, but still, with all that being said, if you have to bank on a Zion injury, for Val to kind of unlock the upside, and I don't even think the upside's like that great, even without Val, with another full season of CJ and BI there. So just one of those guys where I think the downside outweighs the upside, and I think that was kind of confirmed for me just kind of into the preseason. Not that anything specific that I saw in the preseason was like, oh, got to move Val down, but just already a guy who I wasn't super high on, and especially with where he's going in drafts.
Yeah.
So
no one wants to bank on an injury.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Next up here for the Sixers, got Tobias Harris. This is another one that, is based a little bit on preseason, but definitely, the offseason notions. We're expecting Maxey to, have his breakout and kind of step into that third scoring option. And we saw that a lot at the end of last season and through last season as well. Obviously, that kind of traded off games. We saw Maxey have his solid scoring games. We saw Harris they didn't do it a lot together. Obviously, when you have guys like Harden and Embiid taking up offensive usage, it's really hard to have that consistency. But for me, it's another upside thing. I really think that Harris will be able to provide solid stats for fantasy. You know, he's a decent rebounder, you know, defensively as well. But the offensive upside, I think, is in Tyrese Maxey, who's been just insane in the preseason. Now, you don't want to go off of preseason, but he's already a guy I was super excited about for a breakout. We saw it last season, saw it in the playoffs, seeing it in preseason. He's a guy I'm super excited about. And obviously, if I think Maxey takes that step forward, you know, it's not Harden I'm taking offensive usage away from. It's not Embiid. It's got to be a guy like Tobias Harris. So he's just a guy who's just moving down for me a little bit, similar to Valanciunas from just an upside perspective. I don't really see a world where, you know, Maxey has his breakout and Harris, you know, puts up similar numbers and is as fantasy relevant as where he's going in drafts. So just a guy I'm not super excited about. So he's a follower for me for sure.
And I mean, they add in PJ Tucker too, right? And they expand their depth. So PJ Tucker, I mean, he's not an offensive usage guy, but at the end of crunch time, at the end of games, like there could be lineups where PJ Tucker gets a nod over Toby at the 4. I'm assuming they'll play together, but you know, PJ Tucker is a guy that brings stuff to the team that Toby can't. And so not only is Toby's, you know, offensive usage less, you know, valued with Maxey maybe becoming really good, but now defensively Harris is not a slouch, but you have a guy like PJ Tucker who can fill in that role. You've got Melton in there too now. So there's a lot of options that they could throw out there for the lineups.
Definitely. Well, those are our preseason fallers. Let us know if we missed anybody or you guys disagree. Let us know in the comments. Love to hear those. But we've got our preseason risers. We've got our fallers. Going to be doing some drafts. The NBA season, it is coming up.
Next week.
See you in the next one.